Happy Friday, y'all. Welcome to another episode of Tech Backstage. Last one of the week, and joined today by a very special guest, Joe Venuti from Cube. Joe, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm. Thanks for taking the time to chat with me today. I'm really excited about this one. Like we were talking about backstage, this one is a topic that is very close to a lot of things that I'm working on right now myself, and I also think it's a really valuable topic right now. Just in the tech space, I think sales is hard to begin with, right? But sales in tech is, I think it's kind of the next level, right? So excited to jump into the topic today and talk about how we can scale sales dev teams. But before we jump into that, let's talk a little bit about you, your background, and how you ended up being head of sales development at Cube.
Sure. So I am originally from Boston. I spent the first 11 years of my career more on like the operation side, doing like corporate security. After a large round of layoffs, I pivoted into sales. I took a job as a sales development rep with a company called By Appointment Only. Had some success and worked my way into leadership, and then eventually out to Arizona, where I live now. Um, Managed a team in their office out here in Arizona and decided it was time to pivot into the tech space. So I spent time at a couple of very early stage startups, all B or earlier. And it was, a really exciting experience. I don't know that I quite knew what I was getting myself into, 6 or 7 years ago when I started this journey. But I feel like I've carved out, a pretty good career for myself. And I found a space in the market that I really enjoy. Um, I love the ability to work with like early stage companies and young professionals and really feel myself moving the needle both for the organization, but also for the BDRs that we're hiring. Right, like you're never going to hire a BDR who wants to work on your team for 25 years and then retire at 60. Like that's just not what they're looking to do. So being able to facilitate growth both for companies and for individuals who are early in their career has really really been exciting for me.
Very cool. And you've been at Cube or you just got to Cube recently. You were at
I've been at Cube for 2 weeks.
awesome, man. Congratulations on the move. That's
Thank you.
awesome.
Thank you.
Before Cube, you were at I'm just looking down the list here. You were at Pavilion, and then you were at GTN, or I'm just looking down the
So
list.
I'm so Upkeep was previous.
Upkeep, there it is. Yeah.
Yeah, Pavilion. I am still with them. I am the Phoenix co-chapter head.
Okay. Cool.
But yeah, I spent about a year at Upkeep.
Okay.
Previous to Upkeep, I was with the company Sendoso. I joined them like right at their A round and scaled that team from me recruiting from my living room up to about 60-ish reps.
Oh wow.
Um, it was a wild ride, right? When I joined, no one knew what direct mail was, and I really underestimated, you know, the challenge that came with creating a category. But it was a very rewarding, very fulfilling experience. Um, the person who I had reported to for the last year plus at Sendoso had exited the organization. I had an opportunity to join his new team at Upkeep. So I took that opportunity and helped scale the outbound motion at Upkeep. They were really they'd gotten to where they were primarily on inbound and really needed to build an outbound motion. So it was a great ride. And then I got introduced to Cube through GTM Fund, and from my first conversation, like it just felt like they were onto something really, really special. Um, I think that when you think about FP&A and finance teams, they've kind of been in the back of the office for a long time, and now you're seeing them in the forefront of a lot of deals. Right, they're so much more involved in the sales cycle. It doesn't matter what you're selling,
Right.
and especially in like an unstable economy and money's tight and everyone's counting every penny. Finance is more and more important than ever to so many other parts of the business. um, and it's an area that's just really like ready to be disrupted. And Cube has a platform that I think is going to lead the charge. And it was a really really exciting opportunity. And here I am a couple weeks in, trying to get a lay of the land and looking to do big things.
Very cool. Yeah, and I was actually checking out Cube right before we popped on, and very interesting space that you guys are in. Actually, something that I have on my queue for OKRs to look at is how to become a better forecaster and planner, because it's tough, especially in the startup space. You know what I mean? You're trying to, you're looking at potentially, exponential growth year over year, and it's really hard to nail down, forecasts. And as one of my mentors says, that's a great thing that you're overperforming, but as far as trying to use that for planning and analysis, it's really hard to actually be able to use that to create a financial roadmap for the year. So I think it's a really interesting space, and I think what Cube's doing is really cool. And anyways, congratulations on getting there, and love what the company's doing. There was something that you just said, and I think it's a really good segue into talking about the topic, because one of the things that I'm really interested in hearing from you is, it sounds like you have a lot of experience working in startups. You said that you were at a Series A right before Upkeep. And I guess one of the first questions I have, especially you were talking about, all inbound versus getting outbound. In your in your personal experience in your career, do you feel like there's ever like a right answer about like where a company's at when it's time to start scaling a dev team or a sales team, and or is it more subjective? Is it more like kind of on a case by case basis?
I mean, I believe that it's more on a case by case basis, right? I can give you a couple of examples. So when I joined the team at Sendoso, they were so young and so early on, and nobody knew what direct mail was back then.
Hmm.
So we could not rely on an inbound motion. There was no one going to the website. No one heard of direct mail, never mind the company,
Right.
right? So the strategy there was hire outbound and scale through outbound, because you got to go educate the market before you can sell anything or sell to
Right.
anyone. So, that was very unique because, again, brand new category, brand new space. Upkeep um, was a new twist on, a space that had existed, right? They were trying to do something better than what was already out there. So the inbound motion was there, and they built themselves to a certain point on inbound alone. But that's only going to get you so far, right? Now you've got to
Right.
go and create demand. So that's when you bring in someone like me and marketing and demand gen, and then you almost have like the double funnel, right? You got the inbound motion that's already working and clicking, but now you've got this outbound motion that's driving new deals into the funnel that maybe would have never stumbled across your website.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's, like you said, I think it's an interesting concept to try and figure out at what point you start looking at outbound. For us, for example, we've been inbound and referral for the last couple of years, and it's been great. I think we do good work, and I think a lot of our clients are, we tend to get referred out, but you start looking at your forecast for the next couple of years, and you go, well, I don't know if this is going to be sustainable on an inbound and referral only basis, right? And then so you start looking at your outbounds. So when you start scaling a team, right? Like, what do you think some of the first steps are in scaling a successful sales team?
I mean, process, right? I think that so many early stage companies go and hire, right? They'll bring on 3 or 4 BDRs. Maybe they're reporting into a sales leader, and there's no actual like prospecting or outbound process in place. So you got a couple of people, a massive database, a tool like Outreach, and what ends up happening is they dump thousands and thousands of people into a sequence. The sequence is probably not really well written because the BDRs are just putting together what's their best attempt at it, and you end up having like the mass blast like spam effect happening.
Hmm.
So, the way that I look at it is think of it like strategy first, right? Build the strategy and then hire the people that fit strategy versus hiring all the people, realizing what you're doing isn't scaling. Then you bring in a leader who's going to come and build this strategy and try to execute against it. And like in some cases, you end up creating like a high turnover environment for a couple of months because you didn't have a hiring profile, you didn't have any process or any direction. You just brought in some people with good work ethic who were going to dial the phone 300 times a day. But
Hmm.
like in today's SaaS world, like that isn't going to get it done, right? It's got to be like an omni-channel approach. It has to be a tight partnerships with other departments, right? Sales dev, sits like between sales and marketing, But like, you need like the overlay for marketing, you need the buy-in from sales, or else sales dev is just kind of doing their own thing in the middle. So I think like bringing in that sales development leader to be the bridge between marketing and between sales, so that your leaders are all aligned on the strategy. Then you can go and hire that outbound team, right? Inbound is a little bit different because that's more like field, vet, and pass. But outbound, again, you've got two or three people who are just making a million dials, and they're going to catch some meetings just by the law of averages, right? You send 10,000 emails a week, a couple people, you're going to hit them at the right time, but your conversion rates are not what they need to be, and it's not scalable, right?
Yeah.
Revenue goals are going up quarter over quarter.
Right.
So you've got to be able to drive more quarter over quarter instead of like that initial burst, and then the well runs dry and nobody can figure out why.
I love that, and I think that's super relevant. And one of the things that I've always struggled with, especially nowadays, I had one of the first guests we had on the show was he was working in marketing for a company called Wing, and one of the things that we were talking about in that show is just how much almost like marketing pollution is out there nowadays, right? And I mean, how many spam emails hit your inbox every day? Do you have any advice for people that are starting out on, building their sales process? How do you build an effective sequence that um not even just like has a good return percentage, but that really can, suss out whether somebody's a good fit for working, a good partnership, right? Or if it's just, not a good fit without it feeling spammy, right? Like how do you come across as
Yeah.
authentic, when you're sending out tens of thousands of emails?
Yeah, so I mean, I think like the trick is the sales dev team shouldn't be sending out tens of thousands of emails, right? I think that like marketing can run like their nurtures, and that's way less invasive, right? There's no CTA. I'm not asking you for time. I'm just trying to educate the market. So I'm a firm believer that marketing should quarterback those large nurture campaigns that are going to thousands and thousands of people. If you rely on your sales dev team to do that, all you're going to end up doing is getting your domain blocked.
Right.
Um, so like I think that like that's the step off point, right? It's got to start with marketing, and then marketing should be able to drive engagement, and hopefully those people inbound and MQL. But if not, you're tracking responses and interactions with the marketing blasts, and then you're passing that to the outbound team to go and finish it. So I look at content and outbound in like three buckets. The first one is that marketing nurture. Your BDR team should not be touching those. There's nothing telling me that this is where my team should be focusing their time and energy right now. So let marketing warm them up. And if they raise their hand or do something that indicates to me I should prioritize this account, then I will. Right. So like that's kind of your tier three. Your tier two is companies that are a great fit. Right. Like you can establish fit a multitude of ways. You can look at like your best customer profiles and find similarities. There's tools out there, there's a million tools out there that will give you like, fit scores and things like that to really help you prioritize. But that second bucket is really good outbound collateral with ROI driven messaging, talking about, why you, the CFO, should care about what I'm doing over here at Q. So speaking to the persona, I'm speaking to your title. Then like the absolute like top tier, the one to one, that is the person that's raised their hand, the close lost off that it's time to re-engage, someone that's done something, to really put themselves on the map is like all I need to do is go and connect with this person, and like I know this is an opportunity, we have a chance to close it, and that's where, in my opinion, like I don't use sequences or cadence. It is one to one. I am typing to you like human to human. I'm trying to have a human to human conversation. I've done my research. I know you went to school. Maybe I know who your favorite sports team is. So it's a very warm call. Like I know you know who Cube is. So I don't need to start this conversation with, are you familiar with what we do? I know you know that. You've done something that's already told me that. So now let me come in and speak to you, the human being, and build a human to human connection. Because at the end of the day, that is the forefront of every deal that's ever done in the
Hmm.
history of sales.
Yeah. No, and I 100% agree. Um, is do you have them you have them split out in three buckets: tier three, tier two, and tier one. Is that something, talking? I don't know if this is directly related to sales funnel, but would you look at that as like somebody has to start out in a tier three bucket to get to a tier two, or could somebody you identify another company as a tier two, so you don't even put them in a marketing nurturing sequence. You just bring them into the tier two. I mean, same thing. Like tier one to me is like warm, warm intros and things like that. But
Hmm.
just interested, do you feel like it's a step process, or you can kind of jump in wherever?
No, you can definitely jump in wherever, right? You should be analyzing your database on a series of data points, right? And for every company and every department, those data points are going to be different. Um, but however many boxes you check should dictate, whether you're tier three, tier two, or tier one. It's not like the whole database is tier three and then you wait for them to climb up. Because like what I want to have happen is each BDR has 15, 20 tier ones.
Hmm.
Then they have like the majority of their book is tier two. And in a perfect world, they don't have to touch the tier threes because marketing's warming them up. Marketing's doing things in a very non-invasive way to get them familiar with, the company and the logo. And when they begin to interact, they self-nominate without knowing it, but they're self-nominating
Right.
themselves up to that next tier. And then my BDR looking at their book of business. Oh, here's a tier two account, hasn't been touched in 30 days. Let me see what's going on. Oh, they downloaded this collateral from my marketing's nurture email. Let me reach out and see what they thought. And now you have this personalized experience.
Gotcha. And how do you normally get people into your tier three marketing nurturing campaigns? Is that just research that your team goes out and does, or are they signing up for those tier three nurturing sequences? Like, walk us through a little bit of how you make sure your marketing sequences are targeted at people that, like you said, haven't necessarily raised their hand yet, but at least have somehow identified that, could be somebody to send out marketing material to.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think you need to identify parameters, right? What industries do you play well in? Like geographic location, right? Is it an area that you're currently selling and operating in? Company size, revenue bands, like whatever the things that are important. Is there specific tech you need a company to use to be able to use your product, right? So like leverage, the firmographic and technographic data and make some decisions around, okay, here's that block. And it's usually a huge block of accounts, right? Like
Right.
every SaaS company in the world talks about their TAM, right? Oh, we get this massive TAM. They use it as a recruiting tool. So like if that's the case, you have this massive TAM. Cool. Well, now you got to go educate that massive TAM. And what you do is you get those data points together, segment them in your database, and then start warming them up. Because if things are working right at the top end of that, the BDRs are churning out those tier one and twos into meetings. So you've got to keep refilling that bucket.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes total sense. All right. I love that. We spent a lot of time on the first part of this, which is the processes. So I think we'd probably spend another hour talking about processes, but in the interest of time, let's kind of move on a little bit further, down the line. So you've got your processes in place, you got your marketing nurturing campaigns going on, your BDRs, reaching out to tier two and tier one customers, and you're finally starting to get to this point where you're like, okay, I think this is a repeatable process, right? Talk us through kind of like what happens next. Like, you've got that process in place. A lot of times I assume somebody like me who's a founder is actually running a lot of that stuff initially alongside maybe a marketing manager and maybe a couple other people from the team. But at that point, what's kind of the next step to success for actually scaling that team up?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's when you start to really form, the BDR AE relationships, right? However you have the database segmented, like how do you get them working in tandem, right? Like one of the big things, there's always like an evolution with sales development, right? It's come in, like build the team, prove you can set some meetings, and nobody cares about quality, right?
Hmm.
And then you set a bunch of meetings and they happen, but like nothing's moving the pipeline. So now you need some qualification criteria, right? And whatever it is, it's different for everybody, whether it's loose or tight. And then you start to, iterate on that. And then you move into where they're doing discovery calls. And then before you know it, you're handing really, really warm leads from the BDR to the account executive team. But like it's all a process. It doesn't just happen overnight. You're never gonna, do everything I just talked about as far as like tearing the database and build content and then be handing over like these perfectly warm, completely nurtured, ready to
Right.
buy leads. Like that's
Right.
just not the world we live in. So I think like expectation setting across the organization is really important too.
Yeah, I agree with that. Do you look, I mean, I definitely see the difference between an account executive and a business development representative, but do you differentiate between SDRs and BDRs, or do you kind of consider that, one and the same?
So typically, at least in the orgs that I've run, and I think like everybody does it different. SDRs are inbound, BDRs are outbound. I spend a lot of time thinking about promotion paths and how to get a BDR in the door and then an account executive and retain them for a really really long time. Right, we're hiring them because we think that they're a really good, like really unique talent. Um, so like it's on me to ensure that I'm retaining that person like long term. So I like to actually build like micro promotions inside of like the BDR team, right? So you come in, you're a BDR, you hit 110% of goal 3 months rolling, you go to BDR two and then three, and like that's your ticket to move to the next step of the organization, right? So I think like there's ways to keep it competitive, there's ways to keep it fun, and there's ways to really draw that path for the BDRs to move from where they are today to where they ultimately want to get, right? And whether it's leadership, AE, whatever it is, I'm really a firm believer in creating that barrier to entry up front, so everybody knows you interview, you're telling me you want to be an account executive, you're telling me you want to lead a team. Great. Here's the boxes I need you to check before we'll have that conversation. And the second you check them, you've earned the right, and we're going to start having that conversation. So it's an upfront contract. I mean, there's so many BDRs that I interview who hey, why are you looking? Well, I've been
Right.
doing good for a year. I have no idea if and when I'm ever getting promoted. It's really frustrating. So, okay, great. Like I can alleviate that for you.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's great too. And that leads me to a really interesting question that I was just thinking about. But how do you look at overall compensation packages for people on a sales team? Do you lean more towards salaried with, slight commission, or are you more, almost all the way on the performance based side? I mean, how do you weight the upfront costs versus the performance payouts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's got to be a salary and variable situation, especially in the SaaS space, right? It's just way too competitive. The cost of living is through the roof. Like people need to be able to be guaranteed a certain amount of money to pay their rent, pay their mortgage, buy groceries, all that. I do, however, believe that salespeople are motivated by money, so put an incentive package there that's appealing to them, right? Give them something to strive for. My big thing is leave it uncapped. You don't even
Mhm.
need these massive accelerators. Leave it uncapped.
Right.
And in the model I just described, not only is your commission uncapped, but if you're overachieving, you're moving steps closer to that next promotion that is really what you're striving for, big picture. But
Yeah.
to tell a 23-year-old, do this for a year and then we'll talk, that's tough. But to
Mhm.
tell a 23-year-old, do this for 3 months and I'll give you a bump, and then do it for 3 more months, I'll give you another bump. And now we're in that next level conversation. It's a totally different mindset.
Yeah. I love what you just said about leave it uncapped. I'm a big fan of The Office, and there's an episode where Jim gets his commissions capped, and it's basically like he just ends up like kind of like walking around the office like, like playing around with people. And I agree, like why, if you're going to bring somebody into a sales position, I mean, I'm not a head of sales or anything like that, but it just seems almost like common sense that you would leave the commissions uncapped, because as soon as you hit your cap, you have no motivation to go out and do your job anymore. It's like, well, I already got my salary. I already got all the commission possible. Why would I continue to try and work? Right. It just,
Yeah.
so I thought that was a really interesting comment. And, I couldn't agree more with you on that. So talking a little bit, not just on, so we talked a little bit, actually, we talked a lot about outbound, and we talked a lot about BDRs and, getting that tier three to tier one. How much do you have to focus on an inbound process versus an outbound? I mean, are there distinct differences? I mean, I have to assume inbound's a lot closer to a tier one than your outbound campaign, but
Yeah.
how much different are those processes? How much different are the people that you hire for those?
Yeah. So the way that I look at it is I don't know that the people are necessarily different, right? Because a lot of times I'm bringing somebody inbound with the idea that I'm going to move them to outbound and then they're going to start to climb the ranks. Um, but the process is extremely different, right? Like outbound, if you're having a rough month, like you can go and make 20, 30 more dials a day and, swing the odds a little more in your favor of driving a connect rate up.
Mm-hmm.
Inbound, you're a little bit kind of stuck waiting. But while you're stuck waiting, the process needs to be, really around speed to lead. I was just kind of giving an example of like people wanting like instant gratification in like the promotion path conversation, but there's nothing more frustrating as a consumer or a potential buyer than when I want something and I just can't get it. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, hey, and we've all had it happen, right? You hear the nightmare stories. You reach out to a tech company and like you're ready to buy, and they give you a million hurdles to jump through. It's like I've got the check, right? Like I'm ready to buy this thing. Like I don't need the demo. I don't need any of this. Like I just
Just
here's
give
what
me
I
the
need.
account.
Yeah. So like speed to lead is massive, right? You need that inbound person like on the ball, ready to go, able to deliver the value prop, and like I think it's a lot more about active listening, because you don't need to sell them on take a demo. You don't need to sell them on like why they should be interested. They are already interested. You need to ensure that you're delivering the value and the experience to make them continue to be interested. We talk so much about like customer journey, right, and customer experience, and I think that a lot of people lose sight of the fact that customer experience starts the first time they hit your website,
Right.
and 99% of everybody before they're actually a customer is talking to somebody on a sales development team. So, well, that first interaction with the sales development rep is never going to close you a deal. It can absolutely lose you a deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and I think that makes perfect sense. Talk to me a little. I want to circle back. So you were talking a little bit about making 30 to 50 more dials a day, and that kind of piqued my interest. Talking a little bit about commission structures so a lot of these people that we're talking about, especially on the outbound team, which is kind of like the wild west of sales, right? Inbound is a little bit more predictable, I think, but outbound's really, that's where um, all the crazy stuff happens, right? But you're talking about 30 to 50 more calls. Oh, you just got to go make some more calls. So typically, do you base your commission structures and your bonus structures on actual appointment setting, or do you set it on actual sales, or is it tiered? Like you get a little bit of a bonus for an appointment and you get a little bit more if it's a sale?
So I've probably operated in every single comp plan that you can think of or describe. Um, the things that I think about when I'm designing a comp plan for a sales dev team is what's attainable, what's fair, and what is in their control.
Hmm.
I absolutely do not agree with them carrying a revenue quota. Um, if they source a meeting and it closes and there's a bonus or a percentage there, fine. But I do not think it's fair to tell a sales development rep, set a meeting, we're going to pass it to an account executive. We have a 6-month sales cycle, and maybe you'll see 0.5% of it, in half a year.
Right.
Like that is not motivating. Let's be realistic.
No,
Um,
not at all.
I also don't agree with, you know, comping them just to get a prospect to show up, right? Because like now the ball's in their court, right?
Right.
Go call the lowest hanging person in the organization who you're confident will get on a call, and hey, you're going to get your commission, right? I really think that like the sweet spot is accepted into stage 1 of pipeline. Now, a couple of things have to happen for that to be effective, because I do feel like it can sometimes put an AE in a bad spot where like they like their BDR and they want to take care of their BDR, so they're accepting a lot for their BDRs, and now like they're telling the VP of sales, I got this massive inflated pipeline. I don't know what happened. Well, what
Right.
happened looking up their BDR. So like I think that like acceptance criteria is critical. Align with sales, marketing, all of the other leaders in the organization. Like, what does a good meeting look like?
Right.
What boxes need to be checked? In order for this to move forward, right? And I
Yep.
think that once that's in place, it takes the subjectivity out of it. Everybody's on the same page. We know what the 4 or 5 important things are. The BDRs are going out and sourcing meetings that meet that criteria. And in theory, you should have a high acceptance rate.
Yeah. No, I love that. So we're getting real close on time, but I'm going to probably run over here for a couple minutes because I have a couple more questions that I want to ask you that I think are really important to what we've been talking about today. Um, so we've gotten through the process. We've gotten through, sort of actually getting that team in place. Commission structures, how the different departments operate, but there's also this component of the sales team having to communicate with the rest of the company, right? That was something we were just talking about backstage. Talk to me a little bit about where that comes in the process when you're scaling the sales team. Do you start doing cross departmental communication from the get go? Do you compartmentalize it in the sense of like, oh, this is the sales process, and as soon as it gets to this stage, we engage, the onboarding team, or whatever the workflow is after that? How do you look at that process? Do are the departments always cross communicating, or is it a little bit more like, in boxes?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that is on leadership to ensure that the cross departmental communications there. You know, one of like the mistakes I think that I made early in my career, and like, I've been the victim of it happening, somebody else does it, is you make a decision or a change in a silo. And again, like we're talking about like early stage startups. Like there's not a lot of safeguards, right? Like anybody can go into Salesforce and change a field or
Right.
tweak something in a report. And like before you know it, like one small change that I made to make my life easier just set the marketing department back 3 weeks.
Oh wow.
So
Yeah.
I really like stop and try to like really think, if I do this, what's the snowball effect? Who could potentially be impacted? And let me get them all on a call and talk through the idea together. Like an example would be, at certain inflection points in every company's growth, the sales development team needs to segment, right? Whether it's, now we're going to go to like geo based territories, or now we're going to attack by industry or vertical or whatever it might be, right? When I start to make those changes in my organization, if I just do that in a silo, everything I talked about in the first 10 minutes of this call with like marketing providing air cover and sending non-invasive messaging into my target market went out the window,
Right.
because marketing is still nurturing what I told them to nurture 6 months ago. And now I'm going after a different vertical. So I've put my whole team at a disadvantage and ultimately cost the company pipeline, which turns into cost of the company revenue. So like that leadership at the top is critical, right? I really think that, head of marketing, head of sales, and head of sales dev like really, really need to be in lockstep for any sort of like outbound ABM to be effective.
Love that. That's great. All right, last question. As a leader, how do how do you think, or what do you think are like the key ingredients to being a successful sales leader, and how do you keep your team motivated day? I know we talked a lot about the micro promotions and stuff like that. Any other like secret sauce that you would want to share in regards to keeping your team moving forward on a daily basis?
Yeah, be human. I think that everybody gets hung up in hitting the revenue number, hitting the pipeline number, and we talk about forecasting, right, and like scenario planning, and preparing for the best, preparing for the worst. But like at the end of the day, as a leader, you're responsible for the success of other human beings.
Yeah.
And I see so many leaders fall into the trap of looking at their team as like a walking quota, right? You need to produce $100,000 in pipeline a month or whatever it is. But like, let's not forget about that person has, a husband or a wife, kids, mortgage, a sick parent, all the stuff that every other person has. So I think that, leading with empathy, leading with, a compassion for the team. If somebody, is struggling or has a rough month, like take a second and figure out why. Just because Salesforce tells you that they're not making as many dials as they should be, or they're not sending the right amount of emails, like maybe there's something way bigger going on in their personal life that is actually more important than the revenue in that moment, right? Like
Hmm.
they can always bounce back. And I just think that people are really, really can be really, really quick to chalk somebody up as a failure because of one or two bad months when really all it might have taken was an hour's worth of conversations. The ship could have been righted. So, I think that's a big one. Like, get to know your team. Like, make sure the team knows that, you're their biggest advocate. You're their biggest cheerleader. You want them to be able to come to you with the good, the bad, the ugly. I tell them all the time, like, I want to hear from the front lines. My only ask is that you're constructive. They
Yep.
are going to know when something isn't working or when something's broken long before my Salesforce reports gets me to that conclusion. So I'd rather hear it from the front lines. If 2 or 3 people are telling me the same thing, like, that's gold to me, because
Right.
now I can go and be hyper proactive instead of, now there's 6 days left in the month or quarter. How am I going to make up this delta? If I had only known
Yep.
this 2 weeks ago, I promise there's somebody on your team that knew it 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. Joe, we are way over time, but I appreciate you stopping by. This has been a great conversation to have, and it's definitely something that, for me, as well as, like, sales is such a hard thing to do, and anyways. I think you know where I'm going with that, right? But I appreciate you taking the time to talk about sales and to lift the veil a little bit on, building a successful sales department. So thanks for stopping by, especially on a Friday afternoon. Before we go, Carlos, do you want to pop in really quick and just give us some updates about next week?
Certainly. Thank you, Eddie. Yes, actually next week, we do have a full week ahead, and starting with Monday, we're going to be talking to Shannon Becks, the CEO at Voox with a V. And then on Tuesday, we have John Green, the co-founder at Nada.com. Then on Thursday, we're going to be speaking to Perry Wilson, the Vice President of Engineering at Urban Footprint. And finally, on Friday, it'll be with Dennis Fox-Bonilla at Balto Technologies. So that's what we have for next week, Eddie. So we have a busy week next one. So folks, if you're watching, join us right here on Tech Backstage at 11 o'clock in the morning Pacific time. Remember, join us, be here or be square. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Carlos. And Joe, thanks again for stopping by. Happy Friday, y'all. Hope everyone has a great weekend.
Likewise.
Thanks, Eddie.